Hello readers and writers, I'm MJ, and today we're talking about my 10 favorite science fiction reads of 2023. So in 2023, I read a total of 54 science fiction books. This is my second most read category, but I think I read the best books in this category. With fantasy books, it was fairly easy for me to pick my favorites. However, with science fiction, it's been extremely difficult to narrow down this list to just 10 books. There's so many others I wanted to add on here. So I probably will be doing some other videos throughout the year just highlighting some of the amazing science fiction books that I have read. Also, it's extremely difficult to pick my favorites, but I think I finally decided on it. Oh, it's so hard. All of these are so my favorite. The first 9 books are in no particular order. They're all amazing science fiction, depending on what your interest is, and I highly recommend that you pick them up. But last book is my favorite read for 2023 science fiction wise. Again, these are in no particular order. These books are books that I read in 2023, not necessarily ones that came out in 2023. However, I believe for the majority of these books, they were released in 2023. There's only a few exceptions that were actually published earlier. I've read a lot of science fiction arcs in 2023, which is why I've had a chance to read so many great new releases. So the first book I want to talk about is Nothing But the Rain, and this is a novella that has stuck with me since I have read it. I will absolutely pick up anything this author writes, so I'm hoping they either come out with more novellas or more of like a full-length book at some point. Nothing But the Rain is a novella about a doctor that lives in this small town, and the rain has, like, anytime it rains, they lose their memories and they don't understand they don't remember what's going on. The longer they're out in the rain, the more memories that they lose. And it's not just the rain, it's any sort of water that hasn't been standing around for a period of time. So if they leave it out, then eventually they can drink it. Normally I don't like books that don't have nice little neat wrapped up endings, but the ending of this book is fantastic, and just has left me like it has not left my mind since I read it. It's just, again, it's a shorter novel, but the storytelling, the dynamics of it, the characterization, this world building, this concept is just so fantastic. And I can't say much more of it because I will just give everything away. And it's more of a speculative fiction, science fiction novel where it, like, what happens is very much tied into, and like what's going on is very much tied into the nuance of the story. So I definitely recommend that you go check out Nothing But the Rain. I know it's probably not near as hyped as some of the other books, specifically with it being a novella, but it's fantastic. The next book on my list is actually a Star Trek novel, Strange New Worlds, The High Country. This is the very first book for Strange New Worlds, and I adored it. We take the same characters that we find in our first season of Strange New World, and they go on a Western adventure, and it's just so perfectly timed. The characters are so well written. I know Star Trek novels can get a bad rap for being like under nuanced or such because they're such specific genre fiction. But this is just such a well-developed science fiction novel that it doesn't rely on Star Trek itself to be a successful novel, but yet for those of us who care very muchly about these characters, it was still also really developed within the characters. And I think it can be difficult to get that nuance between the two. And it's just such a great start for the Strange New Worlds books. I'm so excited that they're releasing them in hardcover so that I can collect them as such. And it was just such a great read. I can't wait for the next book to come out. So the next book's actually 2 books. I'm combining them together because they are part of the same series. It's actually a trilogy. The first book I read in 2022, and then the second and third book I read in 2023. I don't want them taking up 2 spots on my list, so they're just kind of coming in together. I don't think I could separate one without the other, being as it is a trilogy. Like, you can't just go to the third book and read it. You definitely need to read all 3 books. But this is such fantastic writing. So we follow Coley, who is in a post-apocalyptic England, and technology is just kind of a thing of mist. Like, it's spattered around, but if you find it, then you kind of are, like, it's not known how it works, it's not really understood, so it's more like mythology-wise than actual technology. And in the very first book, Coley gets kicked out of his community for reasons I'm not going to discuss because spoilers. And in this other 2 books, we're following their adventures and what happens to Coley and his kind of almost like epic fantasy kind of group that collects together as they get their own kind of quest and to it's kind of save the world. So it's kind of like got that epic fantasy kind of vibe within a science fiction novel. And the ending to this series is perfect. I knew exactly what it was going to be from very early on in the third novel. I had kind of had suspicions before, but in the third novel there's just one line and I was like, okay, I understand how this is going to end now. And it did end that way, and it was perfect. It just made complete sense. And it was just, I mean, it's just such a fantastic series. It has Transrep in it. It has just a lot of different cultures in it, even though it's set in London. And just kind of to see how, when we kind of separate each other out, how we can just kind of form groups and own cultural identities within these small groups. And I highly recommend everyone read this trilogy. But also, M.R. Carey is now on, like, my favorite author list. So I might as well just go into the next time he's showing up on this list. I actually read his new novel, Infinity Gate, which just came out this year. And it is fantastic. It's science fiction set in Nigeria, I believe, and it is set at, like, kind of, again, the end of the world. We're kind of destroying ourselves with the climate change, and it has to do with multiple realities. There's just so much to talk about in this book that I don't know how to get into it without spoilers. But it's so much of science fiction is very Europeanized, that it was fantastic to read a non-Europeanized science fiction book. It was just, it just kind of blows my mind, even just like remembering everything that happened. It was so well written, such complex world building, characterizations, just like what happened within the novel, how everything kind of come together, the different alien species in it. It's just an absolute fantastic book. So I highly recommend you take up anything by M.R. Carey. I think this novel and the trilogy are the only things novel-wise that he had released. But I could be wrong on that. I also finally picked up Ada Hoffman. Ada Hoffman is a very well-known autistic science fiction author. So I picked up the first book in her series, The Outside. I didn't realize at the time that there's actually more books published in this book, but there's several books published in this series. So I'm very excited that I now have these books to pick up in 2024. The Outside is fantastic autism rap and complex autism rap also. So I highly recommend you pick it up for that reason alone. But the science fiction and world building is phenomenal. It's very trippy. It's not like linear science fiction because we're dealing with the complexities of physics and just like all these different complex ideas. And I just think it's something that really potentially could have only been written by a neurodiverse author. It was a lot to get through this book in the best possible way. I mean, it took me a long time for me to read it because there was just so much to sit and think with. And I mean that as a compliment to this book, because it's not like this easy read, but it's this fantastic read. It's phenomenal as a science fiction book itself. And then once you add in the complexities of autism rap in here, fantastic. So I completely understand why The Outside has as much love as it does, and Ada Hoffman is seen as such an amazing, fantastic author, and I will absolutely be reading the rest of her series. I was blown away by this book. And another autistic science fiction book I picked up finally is On the Edge of Gone by Corinne Duvais. This is actually a YA science fiction with autism own voice rap. This actually is the author that first coined the term own voice as a way of saying, hey, we need to have autistic voice in novels. And when you see where own voice came from, you, like, at least for me, it makes sense of why this is such a thing. Because we have so many autistic voice, like, so much autism present in his book is written by authors that don't understand autism, that to actually allow autistic voices to be represented by autistic writers is so important. And I know own voice as a term has kind of blown up and may have become like almost problematic in its own way, but I think if you take it back to its roots, that it really makes so much sense of why it needs to be a thing. This was such a well-written dystopian novel that looks into socioeconomic class. This is phenomenal autistic representation and just kind of the complexities of autism representation, because anything that says autism is specifically bad is usually written by a neurotypical author, whereas neurodiverse autistic authors understand, you know, the complexity of our own identity, and it's very evident in this book. And the decisions that were made, it's just such great science fiction. There is addiction in here as well, and I don't know, it's just such a phenomenal book. I'm not sure if Corinne has written any other books or not. I will definitely be on the lookout for more because I want to pick up everything that she writes, YA or adults. Another amazing book that I read as an ARC is The Infinite Miles, and this is a book that I talked about a lot earlier in the year when I first got this channel. I don't know, maybe I haven't talked about it on BookTube, maybe it was other platforms that I've really kind of spouted out this book. The Infinite Miles is a spoof on Doctor Who, like it's an homage, maybe that's a better way to put it. So it kind of takes this concept of Doctor Who and talks about the queerness of the representation. It's definitely definitely becomes its own story by the end, so it's no longer more like a fan fiction, and it actually develops its own depth, and stands on its own by the end of the novel. The LGBTQ rep, the transgender queer rep in it is phenomenal. Also, there is this time travel aspect to it, where even though it doesn't specifically get into the complexities of our history, it always acknowledges them while it's traveling through the different times. And in addition, it goes back to the original Star Trek convention, which was just like fan-personing for me. To see that written out was just such an amazing read. I adore The Infinite Miles. It is such a fantastic book. I do not have it on my shelves yet because I'm not buying things, but it's definitely one that I want to have on my shelves and I want to reread because it's amazing. Yeah, definitely one of my favorites. And another favorite is The Deep Sky. This again is queer sci-fi. It is about a group of individuals who get selected to go out to deep space so that they can go to this planet to colonize it. And all of the participants have to have a uterus. Basically, they have to be able to give birth. And so that makes for a very interesting dynamic. But it doesn't exclude the representation within the book, so it's very sapphic. But also there's a lot of trans and non-binary rep as well. And there's just so much that happens in this book. I'm not entirely sure some of the reasons for why some of the things were done in this book. The idea behind the mission itself, parts of it didn't exactly make sense to me, but parts of it didn't necessarily move the plot along either. But it was a fantastic read. Definitely, it's set in space. There's mystery, excellent characterizations, very queer, and just so much going on that I was hooked through the whole story. So yeah, absolutely recommend that you pick up The Deep Sky. Alright, my next book on my list is Translation State by Ann Leckie. This is a companion novel to the Ancillary series, that trilogy that she has already released, and it is fantastic. I don't know if I enjoyed this more than the trilogy itself, but I do really appreciate points of it more than the trilogy. The trilogy has such complexities with gender, which I really appreciate. But I think for some individuals it maybe got thrown in a little bit too fast without as much explanation, and so I think that puts some of the readers off. Where in Translation State, we're actually seeing the story from the perspective of a humanoid version of an alien species, and so they have to better understand humans and kind of understand what the humans experience and what humans have evolved to, because we've been in space, that we have different societies and different ways of expressing those societies, so in different languages, and language is used to identify gender, and just kind of pronoun usage alone, about where one culture everyone is considered female. They're all using feminine pronouns. Another one's that has different pronouns based upon your gender identity, and just there's different language, how language impacts gender identity and how gender is seen in society. And so that's kind of more explained to this humanoid alien creature, where I don't think you get that explanation in the original trilogy. And I loved it, but I could see where it kind of was confusing to some individuals. So in some regards, like Translation State almost could be something to be read beforehand, although you'd be really confused because you need the first 3 novels to understand what's going on. It references all 3 of those novels, so it's really complex. So it's really hard to say like where this novel like should fall in, but it was phenomenal and excellent, and I need to have it on my shelves, but it's in hardback and it doesn't match the original trilogy, and so I don't again know how to buy this to match my shelves. So book nerd problems, right? So now for my favorite science fiction novel of the year. I'm not gonna lie, this was really, really hard. I'm not sure that I made the right decision. I think so many of these books could have been my favorite that I didn't really want to pick a favorite for science fiction because so many of them were my favorites. And so I don't know, like any of these you could put in this spot and I would be fine with that. But I did narrow it down and decide that I'm naming Poster Girl my favorite science fiction of 2023. I don't know. It's a great book, but so are all the others. It was such a hard choice. This book is by Veronica Roth, who I really have come to appreciate as an author. Her work is phenomenal and political, and just there's so much about it. And The Poster Girl is a book that has stayed with me since I've read it. And yeah, like it's just phenomenally written. It is about a regime change. So there was a political group that was in charge of the country, and during that period, the main character was used as a poster girl to kind of like as propaganda, and her father was very high up in this political organization, and we find our main character in basically a prison, which is like a community that's been segregated off from the rest of the population. And but she's known as the poster girl of this movement, and we find that she has, you know, no family there, so something's happened to her family, and we're trying to kind of understand what has happened, what's going on with the regime change, and we learn all about like what has happened, what's going on with this new regime. It's very political. It talks a lot about social commentary, and just kind of also like the brainwashing we give of our children as we're bringing them up in our own ideals. But also it talks about like the hard truths of the imperfections of our family to an extreme, like a big extreme. And she finds out a lot of things that she probably wishes she doesn't know when she is given the chance to leave this compound to solve a missing persons case. And there's so much in this book. I mean, it's definitely one I plan on rereading again. And yeah, it was phenomenal. So again, like, while I could argue that all of these books in this list could have been my favorite, I think this is the one that's probably stuck with me the most, and so that's why it got moved up to this list. Also because Veronica Roth's writing, I think, is just so fantastic, especially in her newer books. So, what science fiction books did you read in 2023 that are missing from this list? Did you find any books that you want to pick up? I know there's just so much more out there to read, and there were so many books that I wasn't able to include on this list. So I'm excited to see what your favorites were. As always, keep reading, keep writing, and until next time.